I woke again to a cold bed. The morning was my aching eyes and the mist not yet burned off the trees. I stumbled sleepy to the reading chair and fell straight into stories. Forests and witches, goblins and castles, children who leave home to vanquish wicked creatures and return years later with their hands full of love and good fortune, happy ever after. My husband came home from his pre-dawn walk just as I was slotting toast between the tarnished ribs of the toast rack. He hung up his overcoat and brushed at the sleeves. His palms came away wet with dew. When he sat beside me, the scent of pine sap and cold air rose from his collar. He tugged a fistful of photos from his pocket and spread them across the marmalade-sticky table. The kitchen lights were too bright. They obscured our children's faces. He said, "I didn't find anything. No one in the city has seen them." I pushed a plate of eggs towards him. "You tried. Perhaps no one has seen them because they're not there." "But I still feel them. I feel them in my..." He sat down and pressed his hand to his chest. "How much time do we need? How long will it take to forget?" I don't know. Did he think I didn't feel them too? Their loss weighed heavy between my ribs. There must be something wrong with the way we're looking. We'll never find an answer this way. We'll never forget if we don't find out who... But he was pawing through the photos and not listening. I let the rest of my sentence fall away. I didn't speak again for the rest of the day. The next morning was a cold bed, my aching eyes falling into stories. The toast in the toast rack. He got back from his walk and said I didn't find anything. I didn't reply. He wouldn't hear anyway. Another day of silence. On the third morning, which was really the previous night, as it was long before dawn, on that morning, I got up before my husband. There was no toast and no stories. I washed and dressed and packed a suitcase. I wanted to say to my husband, you can't forget if you don't have an ending. You can't let go of an unanswered question. Instead, I called to him on my way out, you don't have to search today, I'm going instead. To one side of the house wound the road to town that my husband walked every night. To the other spread the woods. My husband had never walked that road. We'd always warned our children about the wicked witch at the heart of the woods, her sharp teeth and her gingerbread house and her fondness for eating sons for dinner and daughters for dessert. That's why my husband searched the city. He thought that our children would have heeded our warnings. But then I remembered my shelf of storybooks full of forests and castles and brave witch-vanquishing children. I realized that in my children's minds there would be no point in questing to the safeness of the city. My husband and I never spun tales of the city's dangers. No one ever won treasure by following the well-trodden route. I walked off the path and into the trees. Walking took up the rest of the day. I had thought that walking would let me notice the tracks my children had left. But nature is not friendly, and it took all my attention not to let it trip me or scrape me or tumble me down a hill. I had imagined myself the heroine of a fairy tale, skin luminous with dew and robins alighting on my palms. But there were invisible midges in the murk beneath the trees that bit a red rose rash on my forearms and chest. As I walked, I rubbed my jaw on my shoulder to relieve the itch. Hours passed. I began to see the ghosts of my children in every tree branch. At first I rushed towards them, but then I saw they were only shadows. My calves were tense as logs, and my belly was shrunken and gnawing. I put my suitcase at the base of a tree and sat on it. Behind me lay a spread of photos on a sticky table and the syrupy tick of the clock. A house unforgetful with questions. Why had our children left? And why had they not come back? Before me lay answers, if I could learn to see them. I leaned my head against the tree's trunk and closed my eyes. I woke to an orchestra of insects. It was so dark that for a moment I thought I still had my eyes shut. It took me a while to realize that I had slipped onto my side and that my cheek was on something soft. I lay still and blinked while I waited for my eyes to adjust to the moonlight. I soon realized that there was no moonlight, and so my eyes were useless. My hand stretched out into the blind dark. Something giving and dense, like my hair after I haven't washed it for a week. Something hard and smooth and curved, bigger than a fist and tapered to a point. It was the paw of a bear, and it was under my head. The insects still ached at my ears, and I shifted so that I was sitting upright, slowly, so as not to wake the bear. I swayed with dizziness. In the dark, it was impossible to know his size or his pose or his intentions. If I wanted, I could have followed the bear's paw along the line of his leg to his body to see how big he was. I did not want to know how big he was. I wanted a cold bed and the syrupy tick of the clock. But my bed had been made for me, and it had claws. There would be no use in running. I was a day's walk from home. If I ran, the bear would chase me, and he would eat me. In the absence of a better plan, I lay back down and spent the night motionless with my cheek on the bear's waxy paw. Morning came, and I found that the bear had not eaten me. I also found that he was a she. She lumbered into the shadows and returned with a breakfast of berries and silver birch bark. We ate and stretched. We shat and then buried it. We began the search. The bear and I were silent, ramshackle police as we fingertip searched the forest floor, she for food and me for signs of my children. The first day she was successful and I was not, but the next day came soon enough. The days congealed into weeks. Together the bear and I made a new home. No roof, no furniture, just the outline of a house clawed into the ground. The forest unfolded under our feet as we searched. She found everything: squirrels, grass, bees, fish, mushrooms, acorns, enough to fill our bellies every night. I found nothing and nothing and nothing. After a time, I came to see that the bear was not just searching for food. She was searching for her children too. Such a neat story, two mothers united in their search. I couldn't have written it any neater if I'd made it up. But it was not enough. We weren't finding anything. I had educated my children on stories, and that taught me to expect satisfactory endings. The bear was not giving me an ending. One morning I ate my last breakfast of blackberries and mouse flesh with the bear, then carefully explained to her that I was leaving. She did not reply, because she was a bear. I shouted at her to go away. She did not shout back, because she was a bear. I pulled a handful of thorns from a bush and hit her. Half the thorns pressed back into my palm, and the other half disappeared into her thick fur. She reared up and pushed meaty breath into my face. Her teeth were bright as bones. This was the moment that she would leave me or eat me. She thudded back down. Then she turned and padded away with her paws kicking up scoops of dead leaves. Lulled by the slow beat of the bear's retreating paws, I lay down and let the afternoon sun warm my face. I woke with the stars nipping bright at my eyelids. I lay still and watched them tell me stories. There among the constellations, I could find all my answers if I looked long enough. People did that, didn't they? Told the future and the past from the stars. In all my time with the bear, I had never looked up. I began a new rhythm. Sleeping daylight away, curled in the hollow base of a dead tree. Spending the nights watching and reading and listening and learning. I saw my children living in the city and working in shops and bars and drinking and laughing so wide the light gleamed off their wisdom teeth. I saw my children living on a boat in the middle of the sea and eating fish and seaweed and hunting for adventure. I saw my children living in a house not unlike my own, with their own children, ones that would not leave. I saw my children living. Sometimes my stomach made noises or pains to remind me to eat. I chewed leaves and bark. I didn't want to look away from the sky to find berries. Even standing and even in daylight, I couldn't stop looking at the sky. My head was always tilted back with my throat stretched tight. I forgot to blink. Each day brought a new story of my children, a new ending, a new answer. As the stories increased, I didn't know which to believe. They couldn't all be true, and if only one was true, then the others were lies. And if one was a lie, then they could all be lies. I could have stayed in my new home among the stars. I could have become an astrologer or a soothsayer, collecting conclusions to share with other lost people. But all the stories I had seen in the stars were just things I had made up. They weren't answers. Still staring at the sky, I blinked. Then I blinked again. There was something caught in my eye. I lowered my head and felt my neck crack and my vertebrae separate. Looking away from the sky made me dizzy. I rubbed my eyes and looked at what was left on my fingertips. It was snowing, tiny flecks of gingerbread. It reeked of sugar and spice and witches. The witch from the storybooks, the one that brave children always vanquished, I had forgotten about her. I turned away from the sky and looked instead to the forest floor. I ran. Branches whipped my forehead and bruised my shoulders, but I didn't stop until I reached the furthest away part of the woods. I stopped. A grassy clearing in a patch of sun. A siren of birdsong. A house with gingerbread walls and sugar-paned windows and a gumdrop doorknob, and it looked just like the ones in the stories I'd read every night to my children. And the doorknob turned, and the door opened. I was winded, and I couldn't get my breath, and I couldn't move and couldn't run, but it was okay, because it was just an old lady in a house made of sweets, and nothing could be safer than that. The lady leaned out of her front door without putting her feet over the threshold. "I have answers in here for you, my dear, I have answers." Her voice was like caramel. This was a story I had read before, and I knew that she was the ending. She couldn't seem to step over the threshold, so I walked around her house and her garden and her roof and her walls and her windows to try to find a way inside. I found nothing and nothing and nothing. The lady stayed in the doorway saying reassuring things. But by the time I'd made it around the house, my imagination couldn't hold her properly. Her words blurred and smudged. Her eyes dripped down her cheeks like melted chocolate. Her teeth grew through the flesh of her chin and upper lip. They were sharp as snapped toffee. I had imagined her as my perfect ending, the story conclusion I needed. But she was the least real thing I had ever seen. I blinked and the gingerbread house disappeared. I stood alone in the clearing. My skin still smelled of the bear's fur and the bear's nose and the bear's saliva. All those months of searching with her and eating with her and watching her eat any living thing that could fit between her paws. And still I did not see. I was blinded by the wicked witch I'd grown in my imagination and fed on storybooks. I'd thought the bear was a mother like me. I'd thought the opposite of a mother was a scary old child-eating hag hiding away in the woods. But I was wrong. The bear was not like me. She was a bear. I had ignored the scraps of my runaway children, caught between her teeth. The cruelest things do not hide in the dark. They sit in full view in the sunlight and in the clearings. I had found an ending, but I did not want it. I walked to the edge of the forest, sacrificial and willing, looking for the bear's jaws. But she had gone. Perhaps she had found her cubs and her ending. Instead, I turned and walked back home. I found my house exactly where I left it. In the kitchen was my husband. He was still sitting at the table, which was still covered in photos, which were now marmalade sticky. He said, "Did you find them?" "Yes." I took his hand and pulled him away from the photos. Together, we settled into the reading chair. It was big enough for both of us. "I found them." "Will they come back?" he said. I said, "No, that's not how the story goes. Let me tell you the ending." He closed his eyes and settled into the chair. I would tell him stories. Our children living in the city with light gleaming off their wisdom teeth. Our children living on a boat and hunting for adventure. Our children living. One day when my husband was ready, I would take him into the woods. I would show him the real ending. But not yet. I could no longer have the comfort of stories, but he could. I settled in beside him and began a new story.